Barbara was my boss for 14 years, so when she says something like that, it's okay, we can both interview each other. She hired me away from Johns Hopkins University Press in 1998, and is hands down the best boss I ever had. We had fun. We made some history together, and we just had a great time at the National Academies. And so I'm going to be talking to her about what happened at the National Academies and how that ties into the ethics of the choices that we make as publishers.
You know, and I was shocked in 1998 when I called you. Usually you don't call people from other publishing organizations. You get a headhunter to do that for you. But I decided just to call Michael. And within a very short period of time, he said he would come, and I was surprised because Michael has 4 children. And I thought, that's 4 times the tuition of Hopkins. Is he really going to come to the NAP? But you did, and of course, it's changed my life. So, anyway.
We changed each other's.
Yeah, right.
And it was, so welcome to the Ethics in Publishing Conference. So give us a little bit of background on the National Academies Press and the National Academies as a whole and what it is that they do.
Okay, so I work for the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, the Institute of Medicine, and the National Research Council. Hi. And we're the publishers for that organization. And the National Academy of Sciences was created in 1863 by Abraham Lincoln. And in 1863, he was thinking about writing the Gettysburg Address, of course, in the middle of the Civil War, and also thinking about science and how science can really contribute to government decision-making. So that happened, and in 1918, the National Academy of Sciences was very busy advising the government on areas that dealt with science and technology. And they started the National Research Council, so you didn't have to be an actual member of the National Academy of Sciences. We needed more people. In the world wars that came on, we needed more and more scientists to help us figure out, you know, how science and technology could really help the government. So, and then later on, the Institute of Medicine and the National Academy of Engineering came along. And so today, the National Academy of Sciences and its affiliated organizations has 7,000 volunteers who come together and work on studies, the 200 or 250 studies that we do every year, that range from climate change to stem cell research, to nanotechnology, and in all the areas of the social sciences as well, and education, to really, the 7,000 people work on those committees. Those committees turn into studies, those studies turn into books, we publish them, and our responsibility in the publishing division is to get the work of our institution out as far and as wide as possible so that they can have impact.
And so that's the mission of the press, and that's one of the drivers of it. A lot of the choices that we made over the last 15 years. Generally speaking, Congress wants a question asked, wants a question answered, and they will ask the National Academy of Sciences to answer that kind of a question. How much arsenic should we allow in drinking water? And then 20 of these volunteers get together, spend 18 months going through the literature, come out with a report, and then it comes to the NAP, and the NAP publishes it. So that's what the mission is: dissemination. But we were supposed to be financially self-sustaining.
Exactly,
well.
Exactly. And so back in the heyday, we were actually publishing and selling at the rate of about $7 million a year. You'll learn soon that we went free in PDF, and our sales are much lower than that. But yes, our revenue and our expenses need to equal each other. We are not a government organization. We're a private nonprofit, but we are audited by the government because we get 80% of our money from the government. And so we have to actually balance at positive or negative $250,000 every year, which is kind of hard to do, because, you know, if you're making a lot of money during the year, you're feeling good about it, but, you know, can you invest that money fast enough to get your bottom line down? Or on the other hand, you know, as you're making decisions at the beginning of the year, how can you get yourself to break even?
So let's go back in time to 1998. That's when you hired me, and it was the dot-com boom was happening, and every technologist at NAP went off to try to become a gillionaire in dot-com land. And
I was left,
you
too. It was me. I'm a marketing person by training, by education. And they all laughed. I forgot about that. Thank you. That was a very stressful time.
It was. I heard the desperation in your voice when you called me.
Yes, our fulfillment manager and I were running the IT division of the National Academy's Press, trying to figure out if a temp knew what he was talking about when he was pointing to different servers and other things. Because we had our whole technology group was all, within our own walls.
Right.
So, and we started that actually in 1994. So
NAP you were talking about having too much money, and it was the National Science Education Standards had brought a whole bunch of money into the NAP in the middle 90s, which they invested in technology to make material available openly by scanning the pages on a big Xerox machine and making them available online, which at the time, in the mid-1990s, I thought was crazy. They'd be put out of business right away, because who would buy a book if it was available in a fuzzy, hard-to-read, really, really slow page image format for free? Why would you pay money for a book? Well, it became clear that there were reasons to pay money. But your marketing side said this is risky. How did you justify that?
Yeah, some of you might know Scott Lubeck, who was our director at the time. I think it was before you came on. He said we were going to do this. We were going to scan all the pages of our books and put them online for free. And in fact, our division on computer science, who was studying computer science, doing reports on computer science, really told us you better do it or we're going to do it anyway. So we went ahead and did that, and I said I was going to get my resume ready because as marketing director, I was responsible for getting all those books out of the warehouse and getting them sold.
Sold?
Yes, that's right. Yes. That's right. But really what ended up happening was that those images of our books opened our books to the world because our books were not available very often in bookstores. In fact, one of the things that I did when I first came on as marketing director in the 80s was to try to get more of our books into bookstores because we had trouble distributing. When you just had a direct mail piece that said, oh, here's a book and here's a little blurb and here's who's on the committee. And then you had to mail that out to everybody. It was very hard to get distribution. But suddenly, all of our books were open to the world, and you could actually, it was like standing in a bricks and mortar bookstore, except a really special bricks and mortar bookstore. This was a bookstore that carried all of our books. And so immediately you could tell your customer whether or not this book or that book or this other book really fit your needs. And because at that point the technology meant that it was a fuzzy image online, you didn't really want to read it online. And so our sales skyrocketed. They went up by like 30% that year when we went online.
Yeah, so you could make the argument at that point that free meant more sales. And that was an interesting story at the time. One of the things that happened once I came on was we recognized that was also when Google was just beginning, and we recognized that search engines were going to matter and that we better get our material out of this fuzzy format into a format that could be indexed by Google so we could continue this remarkable thing. But one of the things I want to keep making sure we come back to is that we were trying to make sure that we balanced the mission, this conflicting mission that the institution was giving us, which was maximize dissemination and be self-sustaining. And part of your challenge over the decade and a half, was to slow the institution down from demanding that everything happen at once, because there is a balance between openness and giving away the story.
Right. Well, the big balance there was, we had that page-by-page format, seemed to be going quite well, and then in 2000, we were doing all these things with, in 1994, before Google, before Amazon, before PDF. But in 2000, PDF was getting pretty popular, and everybody thought that we should go free in PDF. Not everybody. Many people thought we should go free in PDF because that was the right thing to do, the right thing to move science forward. Other people thought that PDFs would be a direct substitute for a printed book, whereas the page-by-page was not, and that was going to ruin our business model. And so we did an online, many of you probably heard the story, and I'm going to do it really in a short way. We did an online experiment. We pulled in the business school at the University of Maryland, an econometrician, and other statistical people in to work with us to do an online experiment, a consumer behavior experiment, to determine what would happen with PDF being free or different pricing.
This was using science to answer a question. The scientists liked this idea.
Right. Because immediately they had originally said, well, you have to go all free with PDF. And so this experiment was going to figure out who was right. Is it going to ruin our business model, or should we go ahead and go free in PDF and we'll be okay? And so long story short, what happened was that 42, when we tested the files as free PDF, 42% of the people online in this experiment took the free and jettisoned the printed book out of their shopping cart.
So the customer was actually buying a book, and we'd say, oh, by the way, you can get this for free if you want. 42% said, oh, great.
Right. And this was back then. So it turned out that I went back to our presidents, who had originally said, yes, you need to go for free. And I said, well, let's wait for 6 months. Let's do this study. So went back to them 6 months later, and I said, I'll need $1.9 million a year in order to make PDF free. And they said, go ahead and sell PDF. So we did.
So you did, yes.
But about 6 months later, we decided to start to experiment with this. And so we gave the PDF files away for free to everybody in developing countries. And this is one of those ethical questions that we think about, is that, the printed books that we read in sciences and is compared to Elsevier, books are relatively cheap, or compared to Springer. But they're expensive compared to what books need to be in developing countries. And so we knew we would lose a whole lot of money going free to that group, and Michael figured out a way for us to be able to serve up PDFs for free in developing countries, and that was phenomenal. I mean, the PR value of that, and of course, and it fit our mission. We did lose some money from that, but not very much. And it also served as a platform for our next experiment, for the next thing that we wanted to do to try to project PDF going forward. And that gave us a base of what the user experience was going to be like, using developing countries as a base.
So
we did some good in the world.
We did, yeah, quite a bit of good in the world, and it also laid the groundwork, as you say, for restructuring the way in which the studies were funded, and the publication was funded, and the dissemination was funded, so that you could end up making everything free.
Eventually.
It took a while.
So our goal, of course, was to make everything free to the world so that we could make sure that dissemination was maximized, and dissemination as a necessary component of impact. We thought we needed to do that. And so on our little timeline, we started to cut costs, restructure costs, figure out what our government contracts could pay, because we were paying as a publisher a lot of the costs ourselves because we had the money to do that. And so we did some restructuring and figured out, okay, we could push the cost of first copy into our government contracts. Didn't have to have that cost anymore. It saved us a few $100,000 a year. Our goal was to get free in PDF and free files to the world, so we knew that print was going to start to go down, and we didn't probably need our own fixed costs of our warehouse anymore. We also had a printing operation. So the printing operation went away, the warehouse went away, turned all of that into variable costs. And by the end of 2010, we did another analysis and determined we'd only cost the institution $400,000 a year to go free in PDF. And so we projected how much would $400,000 a year buy our institution? How many additional PDF files would go out? We estimated it would go from about $700,000 a year up to $1.5 million a year. And they decided $400,000 was worth it, and we went free, but not in January of 2011, right after we did the analysis, but in June 2011, because they didn't want to give us $400,000 that year. They only wanted to give us $200,000. So anyway, we went free, completely free in June of 2011, and on that day, we were getting on average about 2,500 PDF downloads a day. And on the day that we released, it was a very simple message. It was, everything at the National Academies Press is free. People went wild. They started to hoard, and we had 30,000 downloads that day. And it
continued.
It tapped out. But then, if you look at as I'm going to draw I'm used to having slides. We had PDFs down here, and then we had this real spike. And then it came back down, kind of settled down. People realized we weren't going to take it away the next day. And then we had a really nice lift. that really just kind of, sort of spikes as we have new books that get released, or if we do major email campaigns, it spikes. Nice lift and really, really maximizing dissemination to the world.
To the world, right. And one of the things that the developing countries thing had taught us, we had arranged to require people to give us their email address and make a little comment about the book. So we would, once a month, someone would go through these comments and select them. And so we have these incredibly heartwarming stories of people saying, yeah, this is going to make a huge difference in our wetland treatment of our birds. You've changed our lives.
Right.
This book will affect our hospital policy or our health care.
A lot of our work on HIV.
On HIV, right?
Really
Yeah.
in the developing world.
And it meant that we were that then became a driver for an awful lot of the other choices, because we knew that this would also be the case with the people who were in developed countries but couldn't afford the books or had limited ability to get access to this sort of material. So I also want to say that those structural changes that you were talking about, losing the printing shop, the warehouse, were wrenching, and that change can be wrenching, and making wrenching changes ethically is the biggest challenge. It's easy to say, oh, well, we're going to be an ethical publisher, until you're having to lay people off, change the way that they pay for their kids' education. Yeah. I mean, it's a whole mix of things, and ethical challenges are significant. Excuse me. So at this point, you would say that the dissemination is what number greater than when it was print only?
Print only, when we were selling print only, we did about 500,000 units a year. And now when you add print and PDF, we're about 1.5 million. And yes, believe it or not, in 2013, we had a downturn in the number of PDF files that were being downloaded, and I started to get very worried about that. But then also you think about that's one measure. What's been happening is that the open book piece is, we've actually, created very clear files now. You can bookmark that and go onto a bookshelf, and so you only, need to see that page. And so what we find now is a lot more people are going to open book. And between 2010 and 2014, we picked up 40 million more page turns. And I can't remember how.
40 million?
40 million more.
Super.
I can't remember how many millions of pages get turned. Is it, maybe, do you
remember?
Well,
we had 1.5 million visitors a month, and they were doing 8 to 10 pages per visit, where the average is pretty good for a nonprofit. But if we're picking up that many more,
right.
Well, it means that it used to be people didn't believe that they could read the whole book online for free. But this also is a testament to the continuing work of the people who are at the NAP to improve the experience at the potential expense of print.
Yes.
Right.
Print continues to go down. We acquired one book this year. We don't usually acquire, but we acquired one that was related to something that we do at the academies, and that's 18% of our business last year was that one book. So sales have leveled off, but only because of that one book. Otherwise, it would still be going down. But we do, as a mission-driven publisher, we do need to try to invest in making the reading experience better and better. And hopefully our institution will continue to back us up. So
to sort of, not to close it all the way down, but to sort of begin to close down, since it's kind of getting toward the time. That's right. One of the things that happened to you, I definitely want to open questions, but this is the last part, is that you were the head of the National Academies Press, but that then became a larger role of being the head of the Office of Communications, which is doing many more things, but it's also a kind of publishing. And I want you to talk about the Science and Entertainment Exchange, about Science Ambassadors, the kinds of other modes of dissemination that the institution has recognized needs to be in the hands of publishers.
This is a good segue too. When I said that the PDF downloads went down in 2013, one of the reasons is because there are many more entries into the work that we do than just the book. And part of my responsibility is to make sure that if there's an audience out there who can benefit from the work that we do, and they're not going to read a 300-page book, well, you better create something else to make sure that you get the attention of those people, that you can at least get some of the information into them to be relevant and to make a better decision. And so I'm responsible for all of that. So, for example, if we did a study on concussions in youth, and for sports concussions. And with that, we did a Q&A for coaches. This coach probably not going to read a 400-page document. It certainly got great media coverage, so people were reading about it in the newspapers. We also did a video piece on that. And in addition, we did a quiz, take a quiz, to try to get people involved. So you get people involved in that, and then there's a way for people to dig deeper and deeper, and then finally, they get to the actual book and can read the whole book. We also do websites that way as well. So we have a website series called What You Need to Know About X. And so we have what you need to know about energy, what you need to know about infectious disease, what you need to know about climate change. And it's an entryway for people to get the gist of those topics, dig down into a 4-page brief about the book, and then be able to go a little further into the executive summary, which is another, say 10 pages, and then get down into the books. So those are the kinds of things that I'm responsible for. And in addition, I'm now, has really not too much to do with publishing, responsible for getting more and better science into popular culture and into communities. So I have various programs. I have Science and Entertainment Exchange, which is designed to get writers and directors and producers more excited about science, get that written into scripts, get the labs to look kind of right, in these movies. And in fact, one of the big impacts of that program was that we introduced Seth MacFarlane, who was the head of, or the creator of Family Guy, to Neil deGrasse Tyson and Ann Druyan. And Neil deGrasse Tyson and Ann Druyan are trying to get the next version of Cosmos made. Nobody was picking it up. Anybody who wanted to pick it up, PBS wanted to have control of it, and Seth MacFarlane talked Fox into picking it up. And so we see that as a way to get to a demographic with science that we would never get to in PBS. So that's one of our big wins for that particular program.
That's a big
anyway, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with publishing, but it has a lot to do with science.
Yeah, well, it is part of it. Okay, so let's open it up to questions if there are any at this late hour.
Yeah, we're already 20 minutes late, aren't we?
Well, no, we're not going to have much of a... I said my piece earlier about climate change.
Thank you for that. It's wonderful to hear a story that parallels the journey that we've been on at OECD. Mm-hmm. But I've got a question. It's about money. I'm sorry. What's the budget for the National Cannabis Press, and how much of that is now generated from sales as opposed to from other funding sources?
Our sales are now at 2.5 million, a lot lower than they were at 7 million. I have institutional funding for some of the web pieces. I have institutional funding for all the communications pieces, plus I raise money on the outside for that. So it all comes together, it all works as a zero bottom line, but only $2.5 million of that. Well, it's kind of hard to tell because, our IT and marketing division does all the dissemination, and that's funded by indirect funds. But marketing is not funded by that. And our marketing department is much smaller than it used to be. It used to be 7 people, now it's 2. So, but we push, because we're pushing out so much free that we can still do that on the indirect costs of the institution. So that's my strategy, is to push as much dissemination over into that pot and less into marketing. But any kind of thing that we do that we're really just truly selling, cannot go in an indirect cost because that's government funded. So it's now a hybrid, and it used to be we covered all the $7 million with sales, and now we cover 2.5. Is that same for you? Okay. All right.
Hi. I was wondering, if you had ever thought about or tried the Radiohead model, which is the pay what you want model. I tried to float that at Rand, as you know, but maybe other people don't. We had the same model of everything's free online, and I tried to float this. Let's let people decide what it's worth, but I couldn't get that through. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, it's sort of the public radio model too, so we've talked about that, our development office is not on board with that. But to tell people that you want to pay what you want, well, in that experiment that we did, we tested free, we tested, 110% of the printed price, we tested 10% of the printed price. Any price, even if it was 10% of the printed price, we couldn't get people to take it. I mean, they would take so many more free. I mean, free is just a special price. Because we thought about, well, what if we lowered the price down, to 50%? Would that make people happy? Well, it doesn't.
But I think the nice thing about that pay what you want is free is an option. People can take
right,
zero.
Right.
Bandcamp does that.
Right. I would like to be able to do that. I just think our institution just does. I don't know if they think it's not an ethical thing to do. Since we're at an ethics conference here. I'm not sure why they're not interested in that.